Hey guys, what's going on? Whoops. Alright then. So, this is one of these things that I've wanted to start doing on this channel. And what it is basically I'm just going to pick something out and talk about it for a while. And I was shocked really that so many of you told me that you like to hear me talk about stuff like this. I myself sort of have a hard time keeping my attention span and going long enough to really listen to things that long, but obviously this sort of stuff's appreciated. So what we're going to talk about now in this one, and the first time around I just kicked my tripod with my foot accidentally. I thought we would talk about those old Mopar front-wheel drive cars like the Omnis and the Reliants and the Aries and things like that, the 600s and stuff that had the older carbureted engines in them, because I've had a few of those, and so I've got some history with them, so I thought we'd talk about it a little bit. The first one of those I ever had was a 1981 Dodge 024. It was actually called a Dodge Omni 024, and that was the hatchback version of the Plymouth Horizon. The Dodge Omni, you know, the four-door, which was actually, I don't know if many people know that, but that actually was there's a European car called a Simca, I believe it was, and that was a version of that car, because it was not a car that Chrysler actually, the Omni and the Horizon was not one that they just clean sheet design on it, but they had the two-door, the Omni 024, and what they called the Turismo, I think it was called a Turismo, it may have started out called the Plymouth TC3, those were the two that were two doors, and they had kind of a fastback, like a hatchback type deal on them. They were not a four-door. And then they also had the little truck. They actually made trucks out. They had a whole line of those. They had like 3 different models. So on that chassis, and I think the trucks were called, one of them was called a Rampage, and Plymouth may have had something like, I don't know what they had. But anyway, getting back to it, the first one I had was a quite beat up 1981 Dodge 024, and it was like a faded maroon color, and somehow or another, my mother bought this for me, because at that point, that was about 1990. And so back then, that was really not that old of a car. You know, like that would be today, that would be a 07, 08, something like that. But back then, I don't know, guys, it seemed like back then cars aged faster. So that was, by that point, that was like even it being like 9 years old, it was already like a $500 or $600 cheap car, and it had been sitting. Somebody my mother worked with over here had it, and it had been sitting a while, and it ran okay. It had a Volkswagen. That one actually had a VW engine in it. It had a 1.7 liter VW 4-cylinder engine, which is like a version of the 1.8. The 1.8 is a lot more common version of that engine. And then there was a 2.0 that was unlike a lot of the later cars, like a Jetta and stuff. But that one had a 1.7 liter VW engine, and I think there was another 1.7 that might have been some kind of crazy, I can't remember, Renault or a Peugeot or some kind of French engine. It was I don't remember. I don't have it in front of me, but that one was carbureted, and a lot of those were carbureted up into about 1985, and as a result, that car ran like a bag of crap at times. That's the thing I remember about it, is that it constantly ran weird. And that was the thing about back then, those cars acted up like that when the carburetors were giving problems, is that the main thing is that they never really quit running. I never had problems with it. You know, back then I didn't know much about cars. I just drove them. And it's not that it wouldn't run, but it would just run weird. It was like it was not consistent. It's like you may step on the gas and it may hesitate, or it may be hard to start. Start when it's cold, hard to start when it's hot. It may surge. All the time they were all the time doing something crazy. They had a lot of vacuum lines on them, and I didn't know how to work on it. It's like I said, I just get in there and drove the thing, check the oil, and so it was all the time the carburetor it just never really ran right. And the other thing I remember specifically about that one was that it had a 4-speed manual transmission in it, and it was all I could do to get a gear in that thing. I don't know what was worn out. I figure now, knowing about them now, I figured it was probably the cables, the ends of the cables up there, the linkages were probably really badly worn out. But that thing, man, it would, sometimes I couldn't get third gear, sometimes I couldn't get low, sometimes I couldn't get reverse. It was just all over the place. That was an annoying car to drive. And for somebody that's still pretty much a kid, I was like, eh. But it was all right. It hung in there. I never really had any problems with it. I didn't drive it that long. I only had it I think I drove that one about 4 months or so, and then I went and got myself a better car. I think I ended up with a Chevy S10, an '85 Chevy S10, which was I liked that truck. I wish I still had it, but it was one of those base trucks, had vinyl upholstery. It was a V6 with a 4-speed manual in it too. It didn't even have gauges in it. It had just idiot lights, but that's another video. But I had that one, and then I never had another front-wheel drive Mopar for quite a while until my grandmother gave me her old car when she stopped driving, which was a 1984 Dodge Aries, and she bought that car new. She wrote, I've still got the canceled check for it somewhere, that she paid for that car by check and drove it right off the lot. And she actually, the car she traded in, I'll tell you the little backstory on it, try not to extend this too long, but she actually had a Plymouth Valiant, just like, well, her and my grandfather before he died had a Plymouth Valiant, a 73, just like the one Uncle Phil drives now, except that it was like a bronze color and it had a black interior, slant six, whole 9 yards. So she drove that car, and it started having some problems. It started having some cooling problems with it, like the radiator. So, she being a lady, she didn't want to deal with it. So she was already thinking about a new car. So she bought that Aries. And it ran good. That was a good car for her for a long time. But towards the end of her driving, which was about 2003, when it was about 16, 17, 18 years old, it started developing some carburetor problems. And same deal. It had a different carburetor, and that one had the 2.2 liter engine in it, the Chrysler, the Mopar engine in it, or as you guys up north like to say, the 2.2. But it had the 2.2 in it. But she never really had any major problems. I remember her having a kind of, she'd taken in a lot to have it dealt with. And so when I started driving that car, it didn't have that many miles on it. It had maybe 94,000 miles on it. And it was 18 years old, 19 years old. So I drove it for probably 5 or 6 months. I was there again, even back then, I wasn't keeping cars that long. But I drove that car for a while, and I never had that many problems with it, except that I also had carburetor issues. And there again, it was basically just it ran inconsistently. It didn't run, it would idle up, it would idle down, and then idle up and down, it would die, it'd kind of be hard to start, stuff like that. I was learning a lot more about cars by then, but I thought, well, I guess I'll overhaul that carburetor if I have to. But it kind of leveled off. It didn't really get much worse. But the only thing that ever happened to it that it stranded me was the pickup coil, the pickup, whatever the ignition pickup, I guess I think it's called a hall sensor. But it failed one night, and it just shut down completely. And I've had that happen in different cars, but that one is just like that Mazda, that the cam sensor went out in. It's the same dang deal. It ran crappy. I was just cruising along on a little side street, going home one night from somewhere, and it ran crappy for about 2, 3, 4 seconds and quit, and it wouldn't hit a lick. And so. Had it towed home because it was dark. Fixed it, just dropped a new one of those things in. Wasn't that much money. It fixed it right up. And that car, like I said, it ran good, drove good. She had a wreck in that car. They had to put a new front end on it. Somebody pulled out. My grandmother lived in Kentucky. If anybody's from around Winchester, she lived in Winchester at that time. She's dead now, but somebody pulled right out in front of her and she T-boned them. It didn't total it, but they had to put fenders and hood and all that on it. And then the last one I ever had was that 86 600 convertible, which now I wish I had kept because I could have fixed that car easily. But, you know, at different times, I've already said this, but at different times my attention and my motivation just goes away on me without me wanting it to. So, you know, that car ran terribly, and I kept trying to blame it on something else, like the timing belt being off a tooth or two, and this and that. But I got the head off of it, and it was just had a burn valve. I don't know if somebody overheated it, but anyway, so that's the three I've had, and I like those cars pretty well. They're small, but they're good cars. But I would suggest if you're ever going to get one of those, probably do yourself a favor and get one that's fuel injected. I think they started in '85. They started fuel injecting those, and just stick with one of those. Because the carburetors they're just a pain. I mean, nobody these days really wants to fool one of those carburetors, and I can understand it because they're complex, and there's just, you know, that's the period of time when the automakers were trying to conform to emissions, so they just had this like real tight, for a carburetor, they had really tight control over emissions and trying to make things run as lean as possible. And so, you know, that just, any one thing got out of whack a little bit on one of those. It just that. So I would not buy one with a carburetor. I would not buy one with a Volkswagen engine in it, and I probably wouldn't buy. If I was going to buy one, I'd buy one with a 2.2 liter or a 2.5 liter Chrysler engine in it, and an automatic. Now those engines, to my knowledge, don't have a lot of real problems on them. They're known to lose a head gasket every once in a while, but that's not a real big deal to replace. In fact, some people said they used to replace them in a dealership. They just pull the head up a little bit, slide the old gasket out, and slide the new one in. I don't think you're supposed to do it that way. I wouldn't, but they did. You know, they lose a head gasket every once in a while, and then the timing belt, that's a non-interference engine, so you can lose the timing belt and, you know, it won't mess it up. But that's kind of getting to be one of those kind of cars that these days, you know, somebody said it very well. They said it's interesting, but that's about all it is, and that's true. Those cars they're not worth anything. And you know, I'd say if you can find a nice convertible, they're easy to work on, you know, but they'd make a nice little car to drive. But I don't think I'd buy just like unless someone had one that was super cheap, and it was all there, and I thought it would run. I don't think I'd ever buy another Aries or a Reliant or an Omni or a Turismo or a, you know, Horizon or anything like that, because, you know, they are what they are. Maybe a wagon, maybe, but I haven't seen a wagon around in a while. So, and also, just in relation to that, once upon a time, way back there, not too long after I had that, that Omni 024, I came into possession of a 1982 Chevy Citation, and that was a really, you know, that car ran terribly, but that was a neat car. I would like to have that car now because it was a little bit unusual. It was kind of a green. It was almost the same light green, metallic green as that Oldsmobile back there, almost exactly. And it was a four-door hatchback. I guess those were hatchbacks. I'm not sure. I think they were. It did not have a trunk. It was a hatchback, four-door hatchback, and it had dark charcoal vinyl upholstery, and it had a V6 engine in it, and it had a 4-speed manual with a stick shift in the floor. It is a neat car. The only thing is it was, there's nothing really wrong with that car except that the carburetor was just crap on that car, because I think that carburetor is a E2 SE. I think there's a 2S carburetor, and if that was electronically controlled, you always know that if there's an E in front of a carburetor that's on a General Motors like a E2 SE, or like a E4 ME, which is an electronic quadrajet with an electric choke. E at the front means electronically controlled. E at the rear means it's got an electric choke. If it was not electric, it would be E4 MC. Just MC. But anyway, back to that car. That car it sounded good, man. That thing, it actually had a hole in the muffler, and that's what you did. That's what you used for exhaust back then. If you didn't have enough to replace the muffler, you had a rust hole in the exhaust, and it sounded good. It sounded like one of those older Z24s. When I was in school, man, I thought a Z24 sounded so good. Somebody started them up and they had that deep kind of exhaust, that rumble. It's kind of whoa, whoa. And that's why that car sounds. Man, that thing was fun to roll up through the gears. It wasn't fast, but the carburetor just got worse and worse and worse and worse and worse on it. And it finally got to the point, I'm not joking, guys, it got so bad that you could start it and it would idle. But the only way you could get it moving was you had to start pumping the gas pedal. Like, it was running off the accelerator pump shot. That's all it was running off. There was no, I don't know if the mixture control solenoid locked in the down position or what happened to it. Something bad happened in that carburetor. And like I said, I didn't know about cars back then, so I couldn't fix it. But that thing, it might run a little bit, but you'd let out on the clutch and it'd go if you just tried to. You couldn't even hardly get it moving. And man, you start working it up. It was like pumping one of those air pumps for your foot, man. And you can get it up in high gear, up in fourth gear, and it was like the faster you pumped the gas pedal, the faster you went. Like if you started slowing down on the gas pedal, the car would slow down, like down 40 miles an hour. And oh man, the cars I drove back then, man. You see where I got this, where all this came from. I never had a nice car. I mean, not really nice. I did a few of them. I actually had a pickup that I bought. It was almost brand new. And then I had that Taurus that you saw way back at the first of these videos that got piled up. I had that thing 4 months and got wrecked. It was a nice car, but other than that, a long-term thing with this driving cars that ain't that good. So that's where I started out at. Well, I started out with stuff before that. We'll talk if you guys want to know about it. I'll run through some cars that I had, but I've had some good ones, man. I've had cars you never even see anymore. When's the last time you've seen a Citation? When's the last time you've seen an Omni 024 or a TC3? I have not seen one of those in ages. And I was there, man. I drove one like every day. And I'm just telling you, with a little work they could have been, but as they were back then, they were not a very good car. They were not enjoyable to drive. They were cantankerous. The air conditioners never worked, I mean, that goes for all of it. That goes for Citations, Omnis. So would I drive any of that now? I might drive the Citation with a different carburetor. I would not drive another Omni. No. So there you go, guys. Hope you enjoyed that. We're going to do some more of this. If you guys have ideas that you want me to talk about, let me know, and I'll be glad to discuss it. I think somebody asked me about Valaris and Aspens, those Dodge Aspens and Plymouth Valaris, and I just didn't have time to really answer that very good, so we may discuss that in an upcoming video if you guys want to know about Valaris and Aspens, what I know about them. There's a history of those cars, so we can get into it. Thanks, guys. See you later. Thanks for watching. Have a good one. Out. Bye-bye.